News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. Today we'll be discussing e-scooters, miracle or a menace, Boris's turn towards socialist tax policies and how the militant rail unions are targeting the Queen's Jubilee. But first, it's the news with Olivia Guthrie.
Thank you, Darren. Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. Here's the latest in the GB newsroom. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that school security in the country should be ramped up. The former president was speaking at the summit just days after the murder of 19 children and 2 adults in a primary school in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were outside where President Trump was addressing the National Rifle Association meeting. He's rejecting calls for gun control and instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of school security.
There should be strong exterior fencing, metal detectors, and the use of new technology to make sure that no unauthorized individual can ever enter the school with a weapon. No one should ever be able to get anywhere near a classroom until they have been checked, scanned, screened, and fully approved.
Well, there's growing anger towards the police over their response to the attack. Survivors, including children, were calling emergency services for help from the classroom long after 18-year-old Salvador Ramos had entered with a semi-automatic rifle. Police officers were in the hallway outside, waiting for more assistance. Colonel Stephen McCraw, director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, says officers should have acted sooner.
Hey, from the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can.
Russian forces claim to have captured a key rail hub in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine. It's after officials in Kyiv say its soldiers may need to retreat from their last stronghold in the east of the country to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into the Luhansk region in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces holding out in the city of Severodonetsk. Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky he's working with his international partners in the G7 to resume the export of grain from Ukraine. It's after the UN said a record 220 million people may go hungry because of the conflict. An official says 6 million tonnes of grain and almost 14 million tonnes of corn are blocked in Ukrainian ports. Rising costs of food and fertiliser are threatening global food security. The number of people in the world suffering malnutrition was on the rise even before the conflict. It reached almost 200 million in 53 countries last year. UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said that the risk to the public regarding monkeypox remains very low. It comes as Ireland confirmed its first case of the virus. The Health Service executives say the case was confirmed in the east of the country last night. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency said the number of cases in England is 101, while the total in the UK is 106. Thousands of people are gathering in Belfast today to celebrate the centenary of the creation of Northern Ireland. A parade is heading to Belfast city centre after speeches outside Stormont this morning. There were plans to celebrate 100 years since partition last year, but events had to be postponed because of the pandemic. EasyJet says it's cancelling over 200 flights over the next 10 days from Gatwick, starting from today. The airline says the move isn't connected to the IT issues they were experiencing earlier this week. They apologise for the disruption, but say they're necessary to provide reliable services over the busy half-term break. Meanwhile, travel company TUI have also announced a small number of flight cancellations at Birmingham, Gatwick and Manchester. Football fans are welcoming the news that the sale of Chelsea Football Club will go ahead. The Chelsea Supporters Trust have issued a statement congratulating the consortium led by Todd Boy on its successful takeover bid. The club was put up for sale in March when owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned for his links to President Putin. The Russian billionaire released a statement earlier saying his period owning Chelsea had been the privilege of a lifetime. It's expected the deal will be completed on Monday. And the stakes are high as 60,000 Liverpool fans travel to Paris for tonight's Champions League final clash with Real Madrid. The Reds will take on the Spanish champions at the Stade de France. The final was originally meant to be held in St. Petersburg, but it was moved to Paris after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The match kicks off at 8 p.m. tonight, and Liverpool fans in the French capital are confident of victory.
We're going to win it. Yeah, definitely.
We're going to meet a group of lads in the fan zone later on this afternoon. Liverpool, we're going to win 3-1.
3-1.
My prediction.
Hard to comment. 2-0.
Well, I think it'll go our way, and it'll be 3-1.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Darren.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show. We're going to be discussing, after the latest tax grab that would make Hugo Chavez proud, I'm going to be asking, what is the heart and soul of the Conservative Party? And does it need to rapidly change in order to survive? The latest polls suggest it's in trouble. And with rail strikes planned, including one targeting Buckingham Palace and the Queen on her Jubilee, is it time to actually tackle militant unions? And somewhat reluctantly, I'll address Partygate as 4 more Tory MPs turn on the PM in the past 24 hours. Are you as tired as I am of this confected scandal? And we're going to be discussing so much more, folks, and I want you to get involved, as always. What are your thoughts on the high tax and Tories and Partygate? Are you as sick of it as I am? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Thank you very much. So, folks, as I say, I'm not going to talk to you about Partygate because, in all honesty, we saw the images in the Sue Gray report, and if that's the Prime Minister's attempt at hosting a raucous party, I've seen more exciting-looking gatherings in the safe space of a Labour Party conference after Sabir Korma has replaced Jezza Corbyn. I'm also not going to talk to you about monkeypox. I mean, calm down, dear. The mainstream media's collective attempt to terrify all of us into a panic, it's unceasing and unrelenting. Give it a rest, I say. You'd think the newspapers were a pack of monkeys, the way they're letting out a collective ooh-ooh-ah-ah over a few poxes. And frankly, I'm not going to talk to you about a few £100 off your energy bills thanks to Socialist Sunak, enough to keep the lights on for a few hours at the rate in which the prices are rising. I've told GB News I can do my show in the dark. We'll save an absolute fortune in makeup and the electricity. But what I want to actually talk to you about is more fundamental. What does the Conservative Party actually stand for? It used to be understood. It was a popular policy, wasn't always a sound policy. That's what the Conservative Party used to grasp. It was a party that believed it was morally right for people and for business to keep more of the cash, rather than big government wasting it on inefficient central planning and pet projects. These days, if the Labour Party shouts loud enough about something, the Conservatives end up adopting their demands and putting them into law, or in the case of the windfall tax grab, going even further. Why would any international investor look at Britain and think there's a good place to create jobs if the Conservative approach is one where, if you're making a profit, the government may well decide they'll be having that tar very much? It would be rude not to raid that particular bank account. When the British people put their faith in Boris, the bumbling blonde bombshell, millions were voting for a Tory party that was in touch with them on everything from Brexit, the BBC and reshaping Britain. Communities like my patch in County Durham would be forgotten no more, thanks to the levelling up agenda. Or so we thought. Boris seemed to be for Britain and for people like us. It cut through and it gave the Tories their biggest majority since Thatcher. Now, Mrs. Thatcher, she knew what she stood for, didn't she? When she left office, she had transformed the British economy from being the sick man of Europe to a pioneer of privatisation. It boosted productivity and it led to more jobs and prosperity. She faced fierce criticism and demonisation from Labour, but unlike Boris, she stuck to her guns and she didn't give in. Eventually, it was an economic miracle that would be copied around the globe and in the name of freedom. I'm afraid to say that today's Conservative Party hasn't the first clue what it stands for. And as the adage goes, those who stand for nothing fall for anything. That's what I'm afraid Boris Johnson's doing right now. Boris, the supposedly business and liberty-loving Tory, has overseen the biggest hike in national insurance and tax in a generation. And he's currently cheering on the biggest crackdown on online free speech in the Western world under the guise of the Online Safety Bill. And don't get us started, folks, on lockdown and his attempts to out-green the Green Party at COP26. Cash, coal, cars and trees. More like the biggest con we've ever known. No wonder Dominic Cummings calls him the trolley, zigzagging more than a Spice Girl all over the place, going in the direction of whoever he bumped into last. The vision for post-Brexit Britain used to be one that would shake off the shackles of European social democracy. We would be a vibrant, dynamic economy that would look away from the lazy focus of one continent of the earth and instead look to the world, strengthening old relationships and forging new ones to be at the very forefront of the industries of the future. Well, that progress has been pretty slow, I think it's safe to say. Half a decade since Brexit, and the government has only just brought forward plans to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol, bring back Northern Ireland into the UK's single market, and introduce the Brexit Freedoms Bill. So we can actually lift unscientific EU bans on things like GM crops, which we're going to be discussing and debating later in this very show. And the Rwanda migrant plan, I mean, come on. It's not working yet, is it? As we learned from the Home Office data this week, more than a million foreign nationals were actually allowed to live in the UK in 1 year, one single year. Housing crisis? Nee wonder. Visas are being handed to foreign nationals and they're surging by 35% in a year. And the number applying for asylum in the UK rose by nearly 45%. Are we taking back control or completely and utterly losing it? Is it surprising then that a YouGov poll reported this morning shows that the Tories would lose all but 3 of 54 of the seats that it took from Labour 3 years ago in that seismic election? The red wall would fall, and the Tories, frankly, would deserve it. I don't care if he had a beer in lockdown, but I do care that he is now a clear danger to conservatism, risking allowing a left-wing coalition to seize power. It'll change the system that we vote on and keep the Tories out of power for a long, long time. So I say, as one of the supporters, come on, Boris, be bold, be brave, be the Prime Minister that you told us you would be. Now, folks, some libertarians believe tax is theft, plain and simple. Well, if you believe that, then prepare for a sudden and unexpected windfall tax, armed robbery. But some small state Tories backed the policy yesterday. James Forsyth, the political editor of The Spectator, said that oil firms' extra profits were due to higher prices and President Putin's invasion of Ukraine, not innovation. So it could be snatched by the government. Jacob Rees-Mogg, less enthusiastic, but he actually stopped short of opposing the tax. Just short, mind. Retrospective taxation is entirely improper, as people must be taxed on what they know is going to come, he told Sky. Adding, whether it's a pasty tax or it's an excess profits tax, there is an economic consequence. Well, joining me to discuss this topic is the energy analyst Andy Mayer and the head of advocacy at Tax Justice UK, Tom Peters. Tom, could you just set out for me, please, why you actually think the windfall tax is sound policy? I'm assuming you do.
Yeah, it corrects an original sin, Darren, which is the billions of pounds in profits that oil and gas companies are making from a sort of freak situation on the global markets, not through innovation. So we feel the windfall tax is a good idea to help struggling families who are really struggling as a result of the prices of energy.
Right, OK. So, Andy, why are you vehemently opposed to it then? Do you actually think that this is going to, I mentioned at the start there, the post-Brexit opportunities that this country has taken. If the windfall tax is a signal to consumers, what's the signal to the global business markets?
Well, he's not entirely wrong. I mean, you can make a case for a windfall tax on certain situations. For example, when the government's made a big policy mistake that gives an industry a windfall, then it sometimes uses a windfall tax to correct that. In the North Sea, the case is usually made that because this is a precious national resource, there should be higher taxes. And that's why there was already a windfall tax on the North Sea at 40%. Everybody else pays 19%. So this additional windfall tax, going up to levels that we've not seen since the early 1980s, is an absolute disaster. And we know the investment impact because BP have said that they're reviewing their portfolio. Shell have come out and attacked and said it's incoherent. The Industry Association is now saying they're fighting to stop companies leaving, going to other places like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Norway even. So what a shambles. What a stupid thing for the government to do, having spent months and months saying they weren't going to do it.
So, Tom, good for the coffers of Newcastle United under the new Saudi regime, but less good for those with pensions in Britain, eh?
Well, these taxes have been introduced in the past, not least by Mrs. Thatcher, and there was no loss of investment in that time, so there's no reason to think that this would happen now. And BP said they wouldn't change their investment plans initially, so I don't see why that would be the case in this situation.
Andy?
Sorry, that's just not true. We know from the past history of windfall tax on the North Sea that it has an utterly disastrous impact on both investment and tax revenues. Geoffrey Howe introduced one, he's right. The long-term consequence of that was that by 1992, tax revenues had collapsed by 90%. Gordon Brown introduced one, then raised it again. George Osborne raised it. Investment went down each time. The situation in 2015 and 16 was so bad that the government was paying out negative taxation to oil and gas companies because they'd made such a hash of the tax system. So what Rishi Sunak's just done is combined George Osborne's rise with George Osborne's panicked reaction of creating an investment allowance on top of it, all at the same time. And we can see the company's reaction. They are going to be retreating with their investment plans at high speed.
Yeah, well, Andy, I liked what you said about Rishi Sunak being the most successful socialist chancellor this century. But Tom has got a good point, hasn't he, on the way in which consumers are really struggling. And a lot of consumers, Andy, will be looking at the vast profits made by these big oil giants and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I can't afford to put my heating on.
Well, that's a great point. And there isn't an absolute prohibition on windfall taxes from free marketeers. You can make a case, as I said earlier, if there's a policy error of correcting it. Well, the place where there's a huge policy error is in renewable generation. Gordon Brown's administration introduced the renewables obligation. What that did was mean that these renewable companies would be rewarded when gas prices were high. And that's happening now. They used to have profit margins of about 30 to 50%. They're now up to over 100%. And that's all going on our bills. That's one of the things that's contributing to the cost of living crisis. So if you're going to do this consistently, you'd be taking the windfall tax across the board. You'd be removing the renewable subsidies entirely for the duration of this crisis. That would genuinely help people. That would have an immediate impact on bringing down bills.
Tom, should we scrap the green taxes from energy bills? Wouldn't that help hard-pressed consumers?
Well, that isn't what's being proposed. And, we need to act to help these millions of families who have bills spread out on the kitchen table. And I think the Chancellor has taken a positive step forward with what he's proposing here. So we're in support of this windfall tax on oil and gas particularly.
OK. Now, folks, I'd want you both to set out your story. You've heard what the arguments from each other is. Why, actually, do you think this, Andy, if you say why the government is actually losing its focus on this, losing its track and needs to get back focused on actually delivering on the Brexit opportunities and all of these other things?
Where I and Tom are going to agree is that you do need to help people. The best way of doing that is borrowing money in order to pay for targeted welfare. You don't need to create special new taxes. The Chancellor should reverse the tax rises he proposed earlier this year. He should look at cutting other taxes. We can cope with the borrowing for some time before we then pay it back on the growth that would then follow if we didn't start imposing silly taxes on business.
OK. Tom, quite reasonable, I thought.
No, look, these are freak profits generated out of nowhere, and it's right that they should be redirected to the millions of families who are really, really struggling. So we think this is the right move. And in fact, there's scope for it to go higher. These companies are generating 20 billion alone in profits this year. Perhaps Sunak should have done more. Well, there we are, folks. That's two disagreements, but we'll agree to disagree. That was the head of advocacy at Tax Justice UK, Tom Peters, and energy analyst Andy Mayer. Thank you very much for your company today. Now, folks, there's plenty to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we're going to be discussing Partygate. Have you had enough of it? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with sunny spells for most, though there'll be a cool breeze. Let's look at those details. The sunshine will continue this evening in the southwest, where it's been dry and bright today. Though out of the sun, it will start to feel a bit fresher this evening. In the southeast of England, skies will be a little cloudier, and there is a risk of a light shower for a few of us here. And in South Wales, a dry and largely clear evening with some late sunshine is on the cards, feeling cool out of the sun. It's looking a little cloudier in the Midlands than it has been this afternoon, with a risk of the odd shower. These are most likely close to the Peak District. Over to the north and east of England, an onshore breeze will bring a cool feel this evening, though for most of us here it will be dry. In southern Scotland, the weather will remain similar to the afternoon. There'll be a cool breeze in eastern areas, warmer in the west, especially in any sheltered sunshine. Northern Ireland can expect a fine end to the day, dry with clear spells, though, as with other areas, once the sun goes down, you'll need an extra layer. A mostly dry night, but by Sunday morning, showers will push into eastern coasts as the breeze picks up a little. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started. Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, it's time for so-called Partygate, the never-ending drip of who drank what and when in Whitehall. We saw the images in the Sue Gray report, and honestly, folks, if that's the Prime Minister's attempt at hosting a party, I've seen more exciting-looking gatherings in the safe space of a Labour Party conference after Sir Keir Starmer replaced Jezza Corbyn. I didn't want to cover the issue at first, but it's not the rule breaking. What was the problem, right? It was the rule making. That's the essential point about Partygate. It exposes the folly of lockdown itself, in my opinion. Someone who agrees is the writer and broadcaster Charlie Peters, who I'm delighted to say joins me now. Hiya, Charlie. Charlie, you've seen those pictures. Would you have gone to that so-called party?
No, I think my standard of party extended beyond that level after I left primary school, I think, with like sandwiches and those paper plates. Not for me, no.
Well, exactly. So do you think this called into question the whole hysteria, frankly, around this? The media obsession. The media has been laser-focused on this stuff during a generation-defining cost-of-living crisis and all of the, well, war in Ukraine and a whole host of domestic issues as well, Charlie. What do you think explains that focus?
Well, I think there is, of course, a very strong degree of sort of anti-Tory scalp hunting which exists across much of the media. Any opportunity to attack a minister or a politician on ministerial code issues, they jump at with glee. But broader failings that the Conservative Party has stood over, such as wages not rising above the level they were in 2008, the health system on its knees, huge rise in people paying for private healthcare, and the housing crisis never being more acute. All of these issues deserve so much more attention than they're getting. But unfortunately, this hysteria that you and I have both noticed rumbles on, and it's been going on for 6 months.
Yeah. Do you think this does prove, though, that ultimately the lockdown rules were actually completely untenable and that even Number 10 Downing Street didn't know they were breaching them?
Yeah, I think that's very revealing, the extent to which people who were involved in producing these rules didn't even know they were making that mistake. But also, I think it should tell us that if Downing Street are going to get away with this kind of behaviour, which, you know, regardless of whether you think it's justifiable or not, there should be an amnesty on all people who've ever had to be forced to pay a fine for any sort of lockdown breach, partying, drinking, sitting in a park, I know, evil criminal behaviour. Anyone who's been fined at any level by the government and by the police for this behaviour should have their money back. Because if the leadership can't set the standard, then clearly we can't expect people to abide by the same rules.
What do you make of this monkeypox business? Do you reckon that's, because of course that's the media's new obsession, do you think actually we're going to see further restrictions on our freedom and liberty in the name of protecting us and protecting the NHS from monkeypox?
I can't say I'm convinced, no. I think the way that monkeypox is spreading so far does not suggest that it has the same kind of symptomatic spread via air that we might have had with COVID-19. And I think the pushback on any measures that might be designed to stop monkeypox would be severe. So, no, I can't. I can't see the same level of flap happening there.
I'm wondering, you know, what the actual repercussions have been as far as public health's concerned, because we all went along with lockdown, but I've seen so many people going along the line of, well, hang on a minute, you know, I didn't go see my nan behind a perspex screen or whatever it might have been in a care home, and actually I feel like a fool for having done that, right? Do you think actually the repercussions of this mean that people will be much more sceptical about government healthcare impositions?
I think almost certainly. And we've seen Dr. Jenny Harris promoted to the head of the new UK security agency. Her record during the early stages of the COVID-19 crisis is nothing like obscene failure. Some of her statements regarding mask wearing and gathering in large groups were so completely false that it's kind of reminiscent of a military that promotes its generals who lose wars, that we have someone like her going on to lead our preparation for the next pandemic. So when you see that kind of behavior going on, I think naturally there will be a tendency where people think, well, I'm not listening next time Jenny Harris tells me what to do. But also, while those people will shut up and ignore government policy, there are also lots of people who will be overzealous in the extreme when the next pandemic rolls along. And there are already people, I think, still fighting against COVID-19, still berating people for not wearing masks on the public transport, who can't accept that the war is over, as it were. And I think those people are looking forward to the next opportunity to be in control and tell on their neighbours and be punitive on public transport. I think we should be worried about those people too.
Absolutely. Well, writer and broadcaster Charlie Peters, thank you very much for your time and contribution to Real Britain today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. After the break, militant trade unions are trying to spoil the Queen's Jubilee weekend. How dare they? How can it be stopped? But now, folks, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Olivia.
Thank you, Darren. It's 2:31. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that school security in the country should be ramped up. The former president was speaking at the summit just days after the murder of 19 children and 2 adults in a primary school in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were outside where President Trump was addressing the National Rifle Association meeting. He's rejecting calls for gun control and instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of school security. Russian forces claim to have captured a key rail hub in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine. It's after officials in Kyiv say its soldiers may need to retreat from their last stronghold in the east of the country to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into the Luhansk region in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces holding out in the city of Severodonetsk. Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky he's working with his international partners in the G7 to resume the export of grain from Ukraine. It's after the UN said a record 220 million people may go hungry because of the conflict. An official says 6 million tonnes of grain and almost 14 million tonnes of corn are blocked in Ukrainian ports. UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid says the risk to the public regarding monkeypox remains very low. It's as Ireland confirmed its first case of the virus. The Health Service executive says the case was confirmed in the east of the country last night. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency says the total number of cases in Britain is 106. Train provider ScotRail has warned of more cancellations following an announcement that there would be no temporary timetable brought to cover weekend services. The train operator had previously given assurances there would be late-night services over the weekend. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We'll be back with Darren in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GBNews.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers for your company. Now, folks, is the bunting up on your high street just yet? It's, of course, the Jubilee next weekend and the nation's getting ready. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, remember them? It was reported this week, are actually expected to join the Queen and the rest of the royal family at a service at St Paul's Cathedral next Friday to celebrate Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee and that life of service. This is despite them, of course, and other non-working royals being banned from the balcony. So joining me to discuss this is Angela Levin, the royal commentator and biographer. Angela, thank you very much for your company. Now, first, on Thursday, Meghan actually visited this memorial, didn't she, for Texas school shooting victims. What do you think the message was that she was trying to communicate there?
I'm not sure about her message, but I do believe that it was for a Netflix documentary.
Oh, wow.
The fly on the wall at their home. I thought it was absolutely terrible. And if she did deliver a message, it was that the parents who'd lost their children didn't deserve the privacy more than her importance than to bring photographers along. There were at least 6, I counted. And to use that somehow as to boost her, the number of people who care about her and want to know about her. I thought it was so inappropriate. I think, again, you see, Harry and Meghan talk a great deal about privacy. That's one of the 3 reasons why they wanted to leave being working royals, which is absolutely fine. We've seen instead, though, that they are not private at all, but not to understand people who have lost their children, and they don't absolutely want a stranger walking by the make-do memorial posts for them by someone who's going to then sell it. We do know that it has been sold already, all the photographs, to a magazine. So not just compassion there, which they both talk about a great deal as well, lecturing us on that, how we should be. Terrible. She went to a place where they take blood to build up against, people. And she went there, she said, in incognito. Well, she was with several people who took her round. And she took them some sandwiches and drinks into sort of baskets. Well, they didn't know who she was, some of them, until they realised who's got all these people hanging around her. And they were quite surprised that she turned up unasked. She wasn't invited.
Do you reckon, does Meghan Markle view herself as the next Di? Does she see herself as a Princess Diana trying to emulate the model of the people's princess?
Yeah, you're quite right about that. I think to a certain extent she does, but she obviously never had the fortune to meet her mother-in-law. And Diana was really keen on the monarchy, although she fell out with the individuals there. She was brought up to have a huge sense of duty, and Meghan seems to have a duty to herself, really. And they are quite different personalities. I know that when they had that interview, when they got engaged, that she told, Harry said that his mother would be absolutely happy and jumping up and down with glee. And there's a man in love, that's perfectly okay for him to say that. But I can't see any comparison with them at all in terms of personality.
So how do you think,
What
do you think, Angela, with the British
they
people?
want to do a sort of modern royal alternative.
What
That's
about the
I
British
think.
people, though? What do you think they're going to say, Angela, when Harry and Meghan actually touch down? Do you think they're going to view this as a touching way to celebrate Her Majesty the Queen's legacy? Or do you actually think, once again, the public are going to say, well, hang on a minute, they're trying to make it all about them now, aren't they?
Yes, well, I've read so many comments in the last few days about people not wanting them to come and believing that they will take the spotlight. In one of the papers today, though, the Queen has held out a sort of peaceful, what's it called, olive branch to them, because she wants everyone to be one of a family. And I understand that, because if she wants everyone to be together, everyone in this country, everyone in the Commonwealth, you can't then sort of allow your family to have a big row and be difficult. So I think she was trying to say to the press and everyone, please be kind and let us all try and get together. But I don't think Harry and Meghan can be trusted anymore, because they can have somebody there who's quite clever at getting into a room where he can take a photograph. We don't know if the Netflix people are there, but I do know they've got extra security, so they're not going to let them into Windsor Castle or anything like that. It's just a great shame that they feel like this. I think it'll be wonderful for the Queen to meet her little great-granddaughter, who will be one.
Yeah.
That's very nice. But I do think that their attitude, I can't see how they won't want to make it something to do with them, because that's what they need now. They need the money and they want to please Netflix because they've come in very strong, Netflix.
Well, exactly. And the other enterprises that they've signed up to haven't been doing especially well. But Angela Levin, we'll look forward to hearing your contribution next weekend during all of the celebrations. That was Angela Levin there, the royal commentator and biographer. Now, folks, it's 2:42 and it's time for Scrap Reform Keep. This hour, I'm going to be asking, is it time to rein in the unions? On Wednesday, members of the RMT union voted overwhelmingly for a fresh strike, a move that threatens travel chaos and could see trains cancelled after 7 p.m. next weekend. The demanded more pay whilst threatening what could be the biggest rail strike since the union was founded in 1990, potentially costing the rail industry 30 million quid each day, not an insignificant sum. Meanwhile, ScotRail has been brought in a reduced timetable this week to actually cope with driver shortages and strike threats. And perhaps most egregiously, folks, London Underground workers will strike over the Queen's Platinum Jubilee bank holiday weekend. I cannot wait for automation, I'll tell you that much. Specifically targeting folks' access to Buckingham Palace. So, I'm asking the question, do unions need to be reined in? Should we scrap reform or keep them? Well, joining me now is the former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Stephen, thank you very much for your company. As I mentioned there, TfL, the RMT, ScotRail. Is history repeating itself here, do you reckon, with similar strikes to those perhaps seen in the 1970s?
Well, I know 1970s is actually quite a good analogy. And I think particularly if you actually have a look at what the RMT are doing at the moment, they're almost trying to get the Arthur Scargill crown for complete industrial incompetence at the moment. One thing you don't do in the trade union, and I absolutely, utterly defend the rights of trade unions to organise and collectively bargain, but what you don't do is to threaten 1926 all over again. Say we're going to bring the country to this ridiculous expression about, from the tip of Scotland down to the bottom end of Cornwall. That's bonkers. Look, a really, really good trade union leader is someone who doesn't calls strikes, who actually gets things done by collective bargaining. She or he has the wit and the intelligence to actually use the industrial muscle by flexing it rather than by thumping people in the face with it. And I think the nonsense we got about this particular, I keep thinking, do you remember Neil Kinnock's famous comment about Arthur Scargill at the beginning of the coal strike? He started with a little house and a big union, and he ended up, he had a big house and a little union. And I think the problem is that at the moment, the unions already, I think they've called off the London Underground strike over the bank holiday weekend because of a range of reasons, but hopefully because they realise that they're going against the grain of the nation. The minute you actually say, at the beginning of a strike, first of all, you have a big raft of demands, there's going to be no redundancies. Well, you know, I mean, when I was a lad, we used to have people clipping your ticket when you went onto the tube station. You couldn't, there was no barriers or nothing. You know, you do have redundancies, things change. And the other, health and safety, well, what particular aspect of it? We need to know. And the other thing is a major pay rise. Well, you know, to be fair, most of the nation, except possibly the political class, deserve a pay rise. So the problem is that I have, as now as an innocent citizen, as a bystander here, is why the hell put all your cards on the table at the beginning? Why threaten a sledgehammer when a really skilled trade unionist uses a scalpel, not a sledgehammer?
You know what, Stephen? A lot of people have been writing to me, and we'll have to be quite brief here, unfortunately, but a lot of people have written in and said things like, I'm represented purportedly by a trade union, but actually on everything from, it seems, Brexit. Many of our biggest unions were opposed to that vote for Brexit. And, of course, the pandering to what seems like whackery and wokery far too often, instead of actually representing trade union members who pay their subs. Do you actually think trade unions have lost their way?
Darren, some have, unfortunately. Look, the real conundrum here is a trade union is supposed to represent the members of that union in terms of collective bargaining, terms and conditions of employment. What it is not supposed to do is to bring global capitalism to its knees and end the current system as we know it. There is a movement within the Labour movement called the Labour Party, which actually represents trade unions, was formed by trade unions. And if we want to change a government, you know, you don't do it through the trade union, you do it through the political wing of the trade union movement. And the idea that nowadays it's not collective bargaining, it's not about terms and conditions. And God knows, if you look at P&O Ferry, you look at hire and refire, look at all those dreadful things where unions are desperately needed. The last thing we want to do is to have them saying, we're going to actually end global capitalism. I mean, that's absolutely barking. And if I was a member of the RMT, I'd want my money back.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? But, Stephen, then, what are you going with? Are we going with scrap? Are we going with reform? Are we going with keep when it comes to modern-day trade unions?
Reform from within.
Reform from within, yeah. Well, I think many people will agree with those sentiments, Stephen. So, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, thank you very much for your time and your contribution today. Now, folks, it's time for Campus Clash. One of our participants is joining from the Live in Freedom, a summer school aimed at young free thinkers promoting free speech. It starts in London on June 30th. With that in mind, we're asking today, are students free to speak their minds in university? Universities up and down the country are embroiled in rows, of course, over free speech. We've seen conservative societies banned, we've seen professors ousted, we've seen speakers shouted down. So have our once great institutions lost their way, and are students allowed to speak their minds freely on campus? Well, joining me now is the free speech champion and University of Edinburgh graduate Daniel Sharp and second-year law student at the University of Bristol, Jules Chan. Jules Chan, do you think students are able to express themselves freely on campuses today?
I mean, funnily enough, I actually identify as a conservative in one of the most left-wing universities out there, the University of Bristol.
Well, that's brave.
Now, there's little to suggest that the kind of hostility that you're describing exists on the ground level. We have, for example, an overwhelming kind of consensus that is left-wing at the University of Bristol. But obviously, there are niches. We have the Conservative Association, who is affiliated with the student union. I mean, it really doesn't seem like it's reflected in real life, the kind of suggestion that we're being limited.
OK. Daniel, would you argue that actually that's far from the truth? That's far from the reality for kids on campus? Kids, that sounds very patronising. You're not kids. I do apologise.
I would indeed. It's funny, actually. I would consider myself on the left, so we're reversing the usual roles in this debate. But yeah,
but the
no,
left
I think,
used to be champions of free speech. The left used to be the biggest proponents.
And we should reclaim it. I think it's a great shame that we have let that noble title fall away from us. But yeah, no, I think it's easy to over-exaggerate some of these things, true. But when you see students from a wide range of ideological perspectives, left and right, and staff and speakers and academics, also left and right, socialists and conservatives. I could name names, but there's a wide range of people who have been targeted in one way or another.
Absolutely.
For falling afoul of a particular viewpoint. I think it's quite a narrow viewpoint, and I think it's actually not held by all that many people on campus. I think there is a minority of quite loud activists, and they seem to get their way quite a lot. I think if you look at for example, the Academics for Academic Freedom banned list on their website, you'll see that there's a huge range of people who have been targeted in some form.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
about
if we consider, Jules, where you were talking about the University of Bristol there. I recently, was it last year or the year before? I can't remember now. I'm getting so old, I'm losing my memory. But the University of Bristol, I spoke at the Conservative Association there, and they had to jump through hoops in order for me to actually be able to be offered a position to actually speak at the university. I don't know how you can't recognise that there is a problem when it comes to conservative thought actually being spoken about, conservative ideas being advocated on university campuses.
Sorry, I mean, there is definitely kind of a push, but there's also a pushback. I mean, we're willing to look at every time that these kind of things happen on an institutional level. We're not looking at the ground level, root level kind of pushback that happens every time inevitably when these things happen. It's also kind of important to remember that I mean, free speech is not kind of not an unrestricted right to begin with. So we don't have an American constitution. We do have limits on free speech. So like when universities do no platforming, for example, it's not completely unfounded in the basis of our law.
Yeah, okay. Daniel, do you actually support the government's ideas then around a higher education freedom of speech bill?
Well, that's quite a hard debate. I mean, I'm not entirely sure that I like having to rely on the government to get involved in universities. So I'm a bit more cautious about that. I know a lot of people agree with it on the free speech side of things. I'm not entirely sure. But in any case, I would like to come back and say that on the ground as well, there is often quite a lot of student activism against free speech and against people who fall afoul of certain ideas. You only had to look at Kathleen Stock to see, masked protesters hounding her and harassing her out of her job. And that's not an isolated incident. So yes, sometimes on the ground you see pushback, but other times you see grassroots censorship, if you like.
Yeah. So Jules, then why do you support this bill that's going through Parliament?
I'm not quite sure I would. It's difficult to say. But what I will say is that freedom of speech is the right to speak, but not the right to be liked. And I think that's an important distinction to be made here. So when we consider these instances, it's always important to kind of consider whether or not we're being offended because we're not liked, but rather we're, whether or not our free speech is really being infringed here, rather than our freedom to kind of, talk freely isn't being infringed, but people don't like us for speaking freely.
Okay, yeah, well, so hang on, is that not a contradiction? Because you're saying there's not really a problem with free speech on campus, but then, the government, you're actually saying, well, hang on a minute, the government are doing this for a reason, aren't they?
Well, the way I see it is I'm not quite sure that the government's... Well, to be fair, as a conservative, I don't really kind of see government intervention as a very good thing in the first place.
Well, nor do I, but unfortunately, though, a prominent cancel culture among student bodies and the higher echelons of academia, they are, as we've heard in the case of Kathleen Stock, it's a really, really serious issue. And kids, I keep using that word, students should actually be exposed to as many ideas as possible, shouldn't they?
I just dislike the concept of universities being considered ground zero for this kind of policy. I mean, when we consider it, I mean, YouGov did a poll in 2018 which suggested that students in general, kind of their views on when free speech should be restricted, generally corresponded to the general public. So if this is something that the government's willing or wants to push past, then it's something that we should be very, very cautious about, I think. That's all.
OK. Daniel, I'm going to give you the final word. You've heard what Jules has had to say there, and some have argued, actually, that this is just a right-wing talking point, and that actually free speech isn't in crisis in this country, especially in the university sector. I'm assuming that despite what you've heard from Jules today, and despite the fact that, you know, it is seen as a right-wing issue, you would still argue that actually, far too often, democratically elected politicians and others aren't able to actually be heard on campuses up and down this country.
Yes, I agree. As the token left-winger, I would certainly say that it's not a right-wing talking point. I think it's something that affects people from across the political spectrum, and actually anyone who supports free speech should come together, whether they're on the left or the right.
Perfect way to end that. Thank you very, very much, folks. Now, you've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, and that was Daniel Sharp and Jules Chan. But, folks, thank you very much for your company today. The show is on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m, but here's coming the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with sunny spells for most, though there'll be a cool breeze. Let's look at those details. The sunshine will continue this evening in the southwest, where it's been dry and bright today. Though out of the sun, it will start to feel a bit fresher this evening. In the southeast of England, skies will be a little cloudier, and there is a risk of a light shower for a few of us here. And in South Wales, a dry and largely clear evening with some late sunshine is on the cards, feeling cool out of the sun. It's looking a little cloudier in the Midlands than it has been this afternoon, with a risk of the odd shower. These are most likely close to the Peak District. Over to the north and east of England, an onshore breeze will bring a cool feel this evening, though for most of us here it will be dry. In southern Scotland, the weather will remain similar to the afternoon. There'll be a cool breeze in eastern areas, warmer in the west, especially in any sheltered sunshine. Northern Ireland can expect a fine end to the day, dry with clear spells, though, as with other areas, once the sun goes down, you'll need an extra layer. A mostly dry night, but by Sunday morning, showers will push into eastern coasts as the breeze picks up a little. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Join us for a special GB News event.
The celebration of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee.
From pageantry here at the Palace
to the parties in your street.
We'll bring you 4 days of
unforgettable moments
this bank holiday weekend.
Join us live up and down the country as we share your memories
of Her Majesty's extraordinary reign.
Send us your stories, photographs and videos
at jubilee@gbnews.uk.
Come and celebrate with us
on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started. Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hiya and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. This hour we're going to be discussing scrapping EU regulations after Brexit, specifically around genetically modified foods. We're going to be discussing the Champions League final and Ricky Gervais's transgender joke. But first, here's the news with Olivia Guthrie.
Many thanks. Good afternoon. It's 3 o'clock. Here's the latest in the GB newsroom. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that school security in the country should be ramped up. The former president was speaking at the summit just days after the murder of 19 children and 2 adults in a primary school in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were outside where President Trump was addressing the National Rifle Association meeting. He's rejecting calls for gun control and instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of security in schools.
There should be strong exterior fencing, metal detectors, and the use of new technology to make sure that no unauthorized individual can ever enter the school with a weapon. No one should ever be able to get anywhere near a classroom until they have been checked, scanned, screened, and fully approved.
Meanwhile, there's growing anger towards the police in America over their response to the attack. Survivors, including children, were calling emergency services for help from the classroom long after 18-year-old Salvador Ramos had entered with a semi-automatic rifle. Police officers were in the hallway outside. They were waiting for more assistance. Colonel Stephen McCraw, director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, says officers should have acted sooner.
Hey, from the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can.
Russian forces claim to have captured a key rail hub in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine. It's after officials in Kyiv say its soldiers may need to retreat from their last stronghold in the east of the country to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into the Luhansk region in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces holding out in the city of Severodonetsk. Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky he's working with his international partners in the G7 to resume the export of grain from Ukraine. It's after the UN said a record 220 million people may go hungry because of the conflict. An official says 6 million tonnes of grain and almost 14 million tonnes of corn are blocked in Ukrainian ports. Rising costs of food and fertiliser are threatening the food security of the world. UK Health Secretary Sajid Javid has said that the risk to the public regarding monkeypox remains very low. This comes as Ireland confirmed its first case of the virus. The Health Service executives say the case was confirmed in the east of the country last night. Yesterday, the UK Health Security Agency said the number of cases in England is 101, while the total in the UK is 106. Thousands of people are gathering in Belfast today to celebrate the centenary of the creation of Northern Ireland. A parade is heading to Belfast city centre after speeches outside Stormont this morning. There were plans to celebrate 100 years since partition last year, but events had to be postponed because of the pandemic. Football fans are welcoming the news that the sale of Chelsea Football Club will go ahead. The Chelsea Supporters Trust have issued a statement congratulating the consortium led by Todd Boy on its successful takeover bid. The club was put up for sale in March when owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned for his links to President Putin. The Russian billionaire released a statement earlier saying his period owning Chelsea had been the privilege of a lifetime. It's expected the deal will be completed on Monday. And the stakes are high as 60,000 Liverpool fans travel to Paris for tonight's Champions League final clash with Real Madrid. The Reds will take on the Spanish champions at the Stade de France. The final was originally meant to be held in St. Petersburg, but it was moved to Paris after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The match kicks off at 8 p.m. tonight, and Liverpool fans in the French capital are confident of victory.
We're going to win it. Yeah, definitely.
We're going to meet a group of lads in the fan zone later on this afternoon. Liverpool, we're going to win 3-1.
3-1.
My prediction.
Hard to comment. 2-0.
I think it'll go our way, and it'll be 3-1.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Darren.
Cheers, Olivia. Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up over the next hour. E-scooter deaths are surging. Are they a two-wheeled menace or the green electric future of urban travel? We'll have the debate. And it's a big day for football, as you just heard. 60,000 Liverpool fans are massing in Paris as we speak, and the sale of Chelsea Football Club has been approved. We're going to be bringing you the latest. And shaking off European Union rules and regulations, is gene-edited food the future of farming that could actually ease the cost of living crisis? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But as always, I would love to know your thoughts. Much more important than my own, what do you make of e-scooters, miracle or menace? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. Loads of brilliant content on our GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, as I mentioned there, new figures are showing this week that e-scooter crash injuries have quadrupled in 2021. Are you surprised? The data showed there were 9 deaths across the UK, goodness gracious me, and almost 40% of all injuries happening in the capital. London's Met Police recorded 510 casualties in 2021 alone, more than double the number in 2020. So, supposedly good for the environment, right? Quiet and cheap to run. But do e-scooters risk doing more harm than good? Well, joining me now in the studio is former MP and Secretary of State for Transport, Norman Baker, and the Director of Communications and Government Policy for Rideables, Michael Quintana, and owner of Personal Electric Transport, Mark Schaffer. Now, folks, if I start with you, Norman, please. The government recently announced plans, didn't they, to introduce new legislation to regulate e-scooters. Do you think this is going to help? Is this what's needed?
It's needed, but it was needed about 3 or 4 years ago, because what's happened has been a free-for-all where e-scooters have been allowed to multiply, mushroom in number, without regulation. There are now 750,000 illegal e-scooters on our roads and pavements, as well as those which are taking place in trials. And the reality is that had the government regulated much earlier, then we could have had these much safer. We can't uninvent e-scooters, and they do have a role to play. They do potentially give people the opportunity to get from A to B more quickly, and they do potentially get people out of cars. But the fact is, because there's no regulation to date, they've been a free-for-all. There's been e-scooters on pavements, there's been e-scooters knocking people over, there's been e-scooters going far too fast. So the government is late to the party, if I can use party in association with the government, and needs to sort this out ASAP.
So, Michael, is that what's needed then? Do you think a bit of regulation here and there and it'll be all hunky-dory for these miracles of tech?
Like anything, right? I mean, you know, a bit of regulation on cars, we're hunky-dory there. It's the same thing with e-scooters. He's right. They do need to be regulated. We're not looking for a heavy hand, but we are looking for means of accountability. The numbers, like anything, you can skew the numbers one way to make one point or skew them another way to make another. The reality is, like you said, they have mushroomed. And for mushrooming the way they have, we're still looking at very little kind of per capita accidents and injuries, you know, and fatalities compared to something like cars and other vehicles. Now, you look at bicycles again, you know, there's no accountability there. The numbers of accidents, and Mark will be able to attest to that, are far higher than what we would get kind of per the same amount of e-scooters. So, you know, accountability is great. Just because it has a motor doesn't mean it's bad, but we do want to keep people off of the pavements, on cycle paths, off of the motorways where they don't belong. Anywhere a bicycle goes and should go is where we want an e-scooter to be able to go. That's what
Mark, is this just another sort of Luddite reaction to new technology? Do you think actually people need to calm down a little bit and sort of accept the fruits of modern capitalism?
The fruits of modern capitalism. I think it's the fruits of innovation rather than modern capitalism. The technology speaks for itself, and the success of the technology speaks for itself. They're spread around the world, they're being enjoyed around the world, and there is a little bit of hysteria about the figures. And I get upset, and I know Michael gets upset too, that a lot of the statistics that get bandied around by politicians have no context. And if you look at the context, you'll see that actually per kind of a set number of rides, they're at least as safe as pedal bikes, if not safer.
So, Norman, then, do you think that there's a little bit element of moral panic here, frankly, that people are just, you know, seeing these things whiz by and getting a little bit too scared of them unnecessarily?
Well, they are sometimes where they shouldn't be on pavements. They are sometimes going faster than they should be. They are sometimes driving without lights when it's dark. And of course, when an accident does occur, and they are relatively few, the accidents, compared to the number of scooters on the road, when an accident does occur, obviously that becomes a media event, and people can probably assume that the situation is worse than it really is, because there are no news reports, obviously, for all the journeys that take place when nothing happens. There's only news reports when something does happen, which is unfortunate. So there is a need to regulate this. There's clearly unsatisfactory at the moment to have any sort of form of transport without some sort of regulation. Even bikes have some sort of regulation in terms of the construction requirements on them. So we just need to really unpick what's happened so far, put them in some sort of shape which the public feels safe with. This is the government's job. The government's bringing in legislation rather late in the day, but bringing it in now. And that's probably the answer to sort this out. It can be a welcome addition to our transport mix if handled properly.
So, Norman, if you were in Parliament right now then, would you actually be supporting a ban on them?
No, I wouldn't be supporting a ban. I'd be supporting regulation that says this is the maximum speed you can go. You have to have lights on these machines. You cannot ride them on pavements, and to control them in a way that you would control a motor car, maybe.
Mark, shouldn't we just ban this dangerous menace from the streets of Britain?
Well, obviously not. And I think Norman makes a good point. It's interesting that now people on both sides of the argument are beginning to sort of hone their thoughts on this, and we all understand that regulation is a must, and some sort of control is a must. I don't think we need to get overly bureaucratic, especially with the scooters that are pretty much the same performance envelope as bicycles. I think we've been encouraging people to use push bikes for years for obvious reasons, and we should be doing the same with lightweight electric transport. Now, once the speed gets above 20 miles an hour, and you're into moped territory, we potentially could use a second category for these vehicles so that we can get the benefit from them. And the benefits are obvious to all of us. Even on the people on the other side of the argument understand that if you strip the weight out of transport and get people out of cars and into the fresh air onto scooters, it can only be a good thing for all of us.
Michael,
can I?
Yeah, of course you can. Go ahead.
Yeah, just follow up on that point as well. And this is probably one of the most balanced arguments, and I love this because, like Mark said, we're both coming at, we're kind of coming at it from slightly different angles, but we're all looking at meeting in the middle. And one of the key things too is, especially here in London, with the expansion of the ULEZ zone, or the potential expansion, going to Greater London, you're looking at the utilities and gas prices, petrol prices, all of that stuff shooting up. And one of the quick ways of addressing that, almost near immediate, because we're looking at hundreds of thousands of less journeys in cars if we have legalization. Because like was just being said, we're already looking at that mushrooming. So if we could get people out of cars onto, devices that are lightweight, economical, affordable for people's, pocketbooks, then, and also there's a mental health aspect to it. Whether you're on a bicycle or e-scooter, it's fun to be out and about. You're connected with the elements as you do that. We solve a lot of problems in this one go.
Wait, hey, Norman, fun. It's not fun for people on the pavement, is it?
No, that's got to be banned. And they were saying in the same way you don't want bicycles on pavements or mopeds on pavements. Pavements are for pedestrians, and sometimes quite vulnerable pedestrians who need to be protected from vehicles. I mean, sometimes pedestrians have got limited eyesight, or they're fragile, they're elderly people. So, of course, it shouldn't be on pavements. I think one of the interesting questions about these e-scooters is actually to what extent they will take people out of their cars, and to what extent they'll take people away from walking and get them on e-scooters because they're lazier, if you like, to be on e-scooter than on 2 feet. So that would be an interesting analysis point in due course.
Yeah, Mark, it's a little bit Panglossian, though, isn't it, to propose that actually we're going to see cars taken off the roads and people pedalling themselves around on these little things.
No, it's a proven fact. I mean, if you look at other territories, it's been proven. I mean, Tel Aviv's the obvious one. It pretty much overnight solved some traffic problems in Tel Aviv, which were outrageous. So I don't think that's under question. I mean, of course, there are going to be people who prefer to take a bicycle or take a scooter rather than walking. But that's okay. I mean, scooters are still active travel. You're standing up for one thing. You're not sitting on your rear end, and you're moving around and you're jumping on and off it and you're moving with the traffic, and it is active. People misunderstand. They think, oh, you're standing on an e-scooter, you're lazy. Not at all. Not at all. And, I think that, look, we need to give people solutions. I don't think it's appropriate to tax people who, let's face it, are struggling anyway out of their cars. We need to find ways to give people an alternative which is better, cheaper, faster, and more fun. And we can do that. We have the technology to do that. We just need a government with some vision to help us through it.
I think you're on the money, so to speak. I think you're on the money there. I really, really do. Michael, that's the solution, isn't it? Can it be... one of you mentioned the ULEZ zones where people are just being taxed. On this channel, we have had, I can't count the number of people with concerns about the cost of living, the cost of doing business for those with vans and all the rest of it, of actually being able to operate in London.
And one of the quick answers is, like I said, there's always more to it once you enact it. But broad strokes, one of the quick answers is, if you can increase the number of people who find alternate transport out of their car, but still have the freedom to go where they want when they need to, so they're not forced on a public transport, but that's an option. But if they're on e-scooters or other similar devices, then they're out and about. They're they're removing some of the carbon, removing some of the traffic, which means those people who, like Mark was saying, do need to get around, do need to get to work, or need their cars. For people who need their cars and their vehicles to get around, or who can't take other forms of transport, or are too far away, especially when you get into Greater London. There's not always a tube nearby, and buses sometimes can be few and far between. People like that can take their cars. It gives us a little bit of room knowing, well, if we're removing hundreds to, or thousands to hundreds of thousands of journeys by putting people on e-scooters, then for those that do need to take their cars, we're not having the environmental impact that we're worried about. But it is important that those e-scooters are doing what they're supposed to, staying off the pavement, not going 1,000 miles per hour, not disrupting, daily life. And we're all for making sure that part is regulated.
OK, can I ask all three of you then, just to finish, just to bring this conversation to a close? Children seem very naturally drawn to them, and without clutching my pearls there and saying, won't somebody think of the children, do you actually reckon that there ought to be a minimum age actually applied to the riding of these vehicles. Norman?
Well, I think it depends on the speed of the vehicle, to be honest with you. And you can get, if you take mobility scooters for elderly people, for example, there are different classifications for how fast they go as to what you can do with them. And it may well be, if you've got a scooter going at a low speed, that's perfectly all right for a child. If you're going at a much higher speed, then clearly it wouldn't be. Can I just make one more point, Darren, while I'm on the button, as it were, which is that I'm totally against any suggestion they should be taxed to use them. What we need to do is have a tax system which encourages healthy behaviour and environmentally good behaviour. So, you know, we should be basing our tax system on that. So it should be free to be on a scooter or a bicycle. We should be paying more, frankly, for highly polluting forms of transport like aviation and less for travelling by bus and train.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with the last point, but I did agree with the former point. But Michael, do you think there should be age restrictions on these?
There can be, but exactly like was just said, I think you can limit the speed, you know, so age restriction by speed. You know, if you're under a certain age, you know, then you're restricted to what kind of device you can buy, the speed limit of that device. I could just kiss this guy because he's finally like another voice of reason that, you know, which is what we're after. We're not looking at flying through, you know, pedestrians and knocking over people who are blind and with other, you know, any kind of disabilities or anything like that. You know, we want harmonious, you know, movement. And I think, you know, that is, you know, with a little bit of regulation, but not using it as an excuse to create another tax band and put people who are already, you know, strained. I think we can make this work. And lastly, there is a big industry waiting to happen. This industry, in certain economies, is developing in other countries, and we can take a piece of that pie and help the UK economy with that as well.
Okay, so Mark, age restrictions?
I mean, the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is, again, think about bicycles. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I used to, you know, as soon as I was at secondary school, I rode a bike to school. And to a certain extent, you know, speed permitting, there's no reason why we can't do that. And kids can benefit from that. And obviously, they're fun. And, you know, kids want to have fun on e-scooters. So rather than being draconian about it, let's think of a framework that's safe and let them have some fun on them.
Well, I think there'll be a fair few people watching this, though, saying, well, it might be, you know, all fun and games for the kid on the scooter, but it's not fun and games for those who risk being knocked down by them. But that's just my opinion. Thank you very much to all three of you for setting out your thoughts there today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we're going to be discussing how the UK plans to use new Brexit freedoms to speed up the development of gene-edited crops and livestock. But now, it's time for a check on those news headlines with Olivia Guthrie.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with sunny spells for most, though there'll be a cool breeze. Let's look at those details. The sunshine will continue this evening in the southwest, where it's been dry and bright today. Though out of the sun, it will start to feel a bit fresher this evening. In the southeast of England, skies will be a little cloudier, and there is a risk of a light shower for a few of us here. And in South Wales, a dry and largely clear evening with some late sunshine is on the cards, feeling cool out of the sun. It's looking a little cloudier in the Midlands than it has been this afternoon, with a risk of the odd shower. These are most likely close to the Peak District. Over to the north and east of England, an onshore breeze will bring a cool feel this evening, though for most of us here it will be dry. In southern Scotland, the weather will remain similar to the afternoon. There'll be a cool breeze in eastern areas, warmer in the west, especially in any sheltered sunshine. Northern Ireland can expect a fine end to the day, dry with clear spells, though, as with other areas, once the sun goes down, you'll need an extra layer. A mostly dry night, but by Sunday morning, showers will push into eastern coasts as the breeze picks up a little. That's how the weather's shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, this week the government introduced to Parliament a bill that'll actually allow the sale of food that has been gene-edited to improve human health and supposedly curb environmental impacts. It's one of the country's first big post-Brexit divergences with the European Union. About time, folks. But will it make a difference, and could it even help solve the shortages caused by the war in Ukraine? Let's get back to basics and find out. With me now is a senior energy and environment researcher for Bright Blue, Joshua Marks. Hiya, Joshua. Joshua, why does the EU ban GM? Is it seen as dangerous? Is that the sort of myth around it, maybe?
So firstly, I just want to clarify, because there's a lot of different terminology, a lot of scientific words get thrown around, and I understand people can be quite scared. Currently, what the government has done is only affects plants and doesn't affect animals. And it only allows for gene editing to produce varieties of crops that you could have done already using traditional breeding methods. So the main thing it does right now is speed up the time it takes to get these varieties and to test them in the field.
Right, so what's the controversy around all of this then? Because to me it sounds like a good way of boosting food production and making us less reliant upon foreign actors.
Yeah, it is. And it's a very good way of increasing food security and helping the environment. And I'm sure we'll get onto the benefits later. But I can understand, like even the images you're showing on screen, it can be quite scary to imagine people sort of genetically messing with your food. But all the tests that have been done show it's incredibly safe. Other countries have been using gene-edited food for a number of years, and there's not been a single issue. So it is incredibly safe. And I'm glad the government, and I welcome the government's ideas to sort of test it further in this country to help face some of the problems going forward.
Describe bans on this sort of thing. Is this just Luddite attempts to stop the advancement of science and technology?
I can understand the concern people have, and I wouldn't call it Luddite. I just understand why people are apprehensive. And while I'm very for the technology, I think I've already made that quite clear, I do think we need to be safe and we need to make sure we slowly but surely understand the technology and move forward with it at a very clear, slow pace, step by step. We shouldn't rush to get it on store shelves as fast as possible, and I don't think that's what the government is doing. As long as we do the tests, make sure it's safe, and previous tests have shown it is very safe, I have no problem with it and we should continue. But I do understand people's concerns.
Would it actually help the environment then? How would this technology actually ensure that, you know, we're not importing things from goodness only knows how far away?
So gene editing, as we've established, allows you to alter the DNA of specific crops. And by altering the DNA, we can create certain characteristics. So for example, we could make tomatoes that are more protected from certain diseases or certain pests. Currently, we use huge amounts of herbicides and pesticides on our crops to make sure, you know, farmers get to sell them at the end of the year. We can make it so they don't have to use those herbicides and those pesticides. That protects bee pollinators and other sort of flying pollinating insects. It prevents runoff into the soil and into the local streams and rivers. So all the biodiversity that is negatively affected by the need for these herbicides and pesticides, now they're protected because instead we've just altered the DNA of these crops and they're naturally protected, so we don't have to use these chemicals, protecting biodiversity and all the environment sort of surrounding these farms.
Okay, so then would you say then, given that you've just announced there that, you know, of course it's right that we test this stuff and we see where we can get to with it, but wouldn't it therefore be fair enough, and many people might think it a reasonable proposition, for actual labels saying, look, this is gene edited, this food has been gene edited? Would you support those measures to actually give consumers the information and the know-how about what it is that they're putting into their bodies?
Yes, naturally, and I think most of us are very pro-consumer choice. I've explained the benefits, and I do think those benefits are clear to see. But as I've said, I do understand why people are scared and might be slightly apprehensive, even though it is perfectly safe. I would happily support sort of labelling gene-edited food, just so people are informed and have that choice. Right now, for example, if you go into the supermarket, you get a choice between organic or non-organic. I'd be perfectly happy with gene-edited food sort of fitting a third category, just so people get familiar with it, can see the benefits for themselves, can see it personally, and see how it's helping both the environment and food supply in the country. And then maybe we can talk about the labels again in 5-10 years, once people really become familiar with the technology.
OK, we'll end it there. I'll let the viewers at home decide whether or not they're pro-GM crops and foods being brought into the marketplace. But that was the Senior Energy and Environment Researcher for Bright Blue, Joshua Marks. Now, folks, it's time for Grime Watch, the part of the show where we look at what you at home have been saying, much more important than my big gob, about some of the craziest stories of the week. Yesterday, Labour MP for Walthamstow, Stella Creasy, she told The Telegraph that she believes women can, in fact, have a penis. Creasy criticised J.K. Rowling's position on transgender activism and said, sometimes you have to break cover and be controversial. Well, plenty of you have been sharing your thoughts on this, so let's have a quick look. Lewis says, is Labour's current manifesto to make sure they don't gain any female votes? The constant bowing to minorities and backing of rules that allow women's safe space is clearly not be anymore. Diane said, people will agree with anything to position themselves where they think they'll attain advantage of some sort. Yep, I think, Diane, you're onto something there. I think this is naked virtue signalling, trying to appeal to the Twitter classes. Calvin says, the trans lobby has created a climate of fear. Even prominent feminists are now afraid of speaking the truth. I think that's absolutely right. There is a serious free speech issue when it comes to debating these topics. You are instantly accused of being some kind of vehement bigot for actually daring to say, as J.K. Rowling has, as a survivor of domestic violence in her past, actually saying, hold on a minute, hard fought for women's safety and protection is important too. Let's actually discuss this. You cannot discuss it without being howled down. But that's all we have time for Grime Watch. But do let me know. Always get in touch. GBviews at GBnews, whatever you think of those topics. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain, though, of course. And next up, I'm going to be joined, especially speaking of cancellation, folks, I'll be joined by Alex Epstein, the author, fighting attempts to cancel his book on fossil fuels. Why is the left trying to shut down debate on this important issue during, of course, a very serious energy crisis? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Thank you, Darren. Here's the news, not the weather, I'm afraid. It's 3:33. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Donald Trump has told a pro-gun convention in America that school security in the country should be ramped up. The former president was speaking at the summit just days after the murder of 19 children and 2 adults in a primary school in Texas. Hundreds of protesters were outside where President Trump was addressing the National Rifle Association meeting. He's rejecting calls for gun control and instead calling for a top-to-bottom overhaul of security in schools. Boris Johnson says the West is working to avert a global food crisis by releasing millions of tons of grain and corn currently blocked in Ukrainian ports. The Prime Minister told President Zelensky Britain and the G7 are attempting to end the Russian blockade. It's after the UN warned a record 220 million people may go hungry as a result of the conflict. Russian forces claim to have captured a key rail hub in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine. It's after officials in Kyiv say its soldiers may need to retreat from their last stronghold in the east of the country to avoid being captured. The Kremlin has sent thousands of troops into the Luhansk region in an attempt to encircle Ukrainian forces holding out in the city of Severodonetsk. Train provider ScotRail has warned of more cancellations after announcing there'll be no temporary timetable brought in to cover weekend services. The train operator had previously given assurances there would be late-night services over the weekend, but says it's unable to implement a temporary timetable due to what they call complexities. And Prince William has overseen the final dress rehearsal for next week's Trooping the Colour ceremony. As Colonel of the regiment, the Duke of Cambridge led the parade on horseback. The 90-minute spectacle will kick off the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations over the bank holiday weekend. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Now, folks, I want to talk to you today about Alex Epstein, an author who has written a book about why the world needs fossil fuels. You might think that's somewhat controversial in this age of coal, cash, cars and trees, or whatever the vacuous statement was from COP26. The US media attempted to actually cancel this book, and now, of course, there are attempts online on that infamous cesspit, twitter.com. It comes, of course, in the middle of an energy crisis when I think this stuff needs to be discussed and needs to be debated. But the Washington Post, they dug up articles from 1999 written in a student newspaper. There have been attempts to smear Alex's name. And actually, I'm really worried that there are very obvious, blatant attempts from some pockets of serious activism to try and clamp down on serious, valid discussion and debate about the causes of our current energy crisis and the cost and repercussions of net zero. Why do they always seem to play the man and not the ball? Well, the man joins me now, Alex Epstein, the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and Fossil Future, which is out now, so do check it out. He joins me from California. Alex, why are people so afraid of this book? What is it you think that you're saying, the argument you're making, that is actually so terrifying?
Well, there's really been a monopoly on this view that we should rapidly eliminate fossil fuels. And I think I've been one of the most effective, if not the most effective person in challenging it, first with the moral case for fossil fuels. And now I think it's at the next level with Fossil Future. And so I think what's happening is people are afraid of that. People who are in this establishment, they've never been challenged. They've just had this ridiculous narrative that, oh, if you believe in climate change, then fossil fuels are bad and we got to get rid of them immediately. Like, I argue that doesn't make any sense. I believe we impact climate. I just believe the negatives of that are far outweighed by the positives of fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. So instead of answering that argument and admitting maybe they're wrong, they just want to attack me and try these different ridiculous cancel things.
So do you think actually people may well agree with you? They may pick up a copy of either of your books and think, hang on a minute, I totally agree with the arguments that Alex has made here, but I'm far too afraid to actually voice my opinion online. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think it's a real concern. I've heard that many, many times. People will just tell me privately, yeah, I agree with you, but I'm afraid of it. I mean, one thing you can do is just get the book and share it privately with people and talk to people that you trust. The other thing is, the more people are talking about these ideas, the more openness there is. And in particular, you mentioned there's an energy crisis. This is a time when people's minds are more open than ever to the idea that there's something wrong with this anti-fossil fuel narrative, because clearly it's left us short of fossil fuels, and we really need them. Even Joe Biden is begging every dictator he can find for fossil fuels, even though he ran on, I guarantee you, we will end fossil fuel.
Of course. Why do you think the climate issue is ultimately, at the end of the day, treated differently by media outlets, whether that be in Britain or in the US? There seems to be no attempt at balance, and actually there is quite a fair bit of censorship on this debate, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the reason, and I talk about this in chapter 3 of Fossil Future, is there's really a primitive, and I would regard as anti-human religion going on here. I think this is very much religious dogmatism that's happening. And it's really this core belief that we shouldn't impact the planet, that that's evil. And if we do, kind of the nature God is going to punish us. There's this very deep view that our impact is bad and it's going to be punished. And so that's why you get this religious reaction that, oh my gosh, someone went against the religion, versus, oh, this person has a different weighing of the costs and benefits of our climate impacts versus the benefits of fossil fuels, which that should just be a civilized, polite discussion.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, one of the debates that it doesn't seem to be as toxic as it is here in the UK is around shale gas extraction. Do you think the US is in a better position than the United Kingdom because it hasn't put in place an effective ban and is actually able to frack and ease your energy crisis there?
I think, of course, I don't know how you could deny this. I mean, it's really tragic because the US innovated so much in shale technology, both shale oil and shale gas, and overwhelmingly the response of Europe and UK is, hey, let's ban this. Let's ban the most potent energy technology of the last 20 years, and let's mandate as much unreliable solar and wind as we can, which, by the way, is going to make you extra dependent on natural gas, since natural gas is by far the best thing for overcoming the unreliability and variability of solar and wind. So yeah, this is directly responsible for an energy crisis, and for you guys having it much more severely than we do.
Yeah, Alex, I know you sometimes are asked to comment on Australian politics as well as ours here in Blighty. I'm wondering, do you have any takeaways from the Australian election? Because Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister now, who lost the election, he actually put into law net zero by 2050. It's something that we've done here in the United Kingdom. And he still lost the election, right? He lost out to Greens and Independents campaigning on green issues. Do you think this is a lesson for Conservative politicians, for Conservative parties, that actually you can't out-green the Greens?
100%. In chapter 11 of the book, I talk about this issue of arguing to 100, which is what successful people do. So arguing to 100 means you define the vision and you define the policy for getting there. You don't just react to theirs and try to me too them. And what Morrison and others are doing is they're accepting that the goal is rapidly eliminate fossil fuels, and then they're just quibbling about the policies. Versus I say the goal should be global human flourishing and global human empowerment, which means everyone in the world has low-cost, reliable energy. And I think that kind of thing can inspire people, and you can argue for good policies, versus if you concede net zero, of course you have to agree with all these statist anti-freedom policies. And of course you can never compete with the Greens on being green.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about corporate ESG policies? You know, you've got woke corporations these days saying, well, we're certainly not going to put our investments in oil. You've got pension groups saying, you know, we're turning away from the likes of so-called fossil fuel corporations and all the rest of it. Is this actually making the energy crisis worse? Is it woke capitalism that's responsible?
Yeah, it's very connected to government, so it's not a totally separate thing. Yeah, but yeah, these guys are killers in the effects of what they're doing, because what they've said is let's suppress oil investment, oil production, oil transportation, as well as natural gas and as well as coal. And what does that do? That artificially limits the supply, particularly in the freer parts of the world. So two things happen. One is the overall supply goes down, and two, the freer parts of the world depend more on the less free parts of the world. That's why you have this scary spectacle of so much of Europe depending on Russia. And even, you know, the United States is being threatened as well. But Europe is in particular in a disastrous situation. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is tell the US, stop trying to emulate Europe, which was Biden's whole agenda, which has fortunately gotten largely derailed.
Right, yeah, but then you've got countries like Scotland, just north of us here in England, part of the United Kingdom, which is saying, look, we managed to power Scotland using wind energy, harnessing the power and the technology of wind. Why can't that actually play a part in our future, Alex, and get us away from the likes of Russia, like you say?
Well, I mean, first of all, wind is only providing electricity. And when you look at all of these specific examples, I don't have the numbers of Scotland in front of me, but the more wind you're using, the more you're depending on more reliable neighbors to offload. Like you can offload excess and then you need to import when you don't have it. This is what we have. I know this example very well in California, where we import a huge percentage of our electricity because we have so many solar panels that we have excess electricity in the middle of the day that we have to get rid of. And then we often have electricity droughts. And we've been lucky because our neighbors have had more coal and natural gas, but now they're starting to follow this policy. And so soon there's going to be nobody to bail out what I call the unreliables, which is why in the US, we have national talk of blackouts for the first time I can remember this summer, because everyone is starting to focus on more unreliables and fewer reliables.
Well, Alex, that's a really good place to end that discussion, I think. Alex Epstein, the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and Fossil Future, thank you very much for your time on Real Britain today.
Thanks.
Now, folks, it's time for a quick football update. Two of the best teams in the sport play this evening. Real Madrid and Liverpool will battle it out for the Champions League title tonight at 8 o'clock in what will be Liverpool's 10th appearance. The game, of course, has been moved from St. Petersburg to Paris. The sport taking quite a political stance there, of course, in saying, no, sirree, we are not playing in Russia. Also this week, a 4.25 billion quid sale of Chelsea Football Club by the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, signed off by the British government, securing the club's survival under new American ownership. Joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is GB News' sports broadcaster and the writer, Aidan McGee. Aidan, thank you very much for your company.
No worries, Darren. Nice to see you.
Now, are you going to be watching the final? How do you think it's going to go? What's your prediction?
I'm doing something different tonight because Mark Dolan wants me on down the line after the game. So I was actually watching, I was in Bromley at the View Cinema where I live, and I was in there the other night watching Top Gun Maverick, just reliving my youth, you know. And I noticed that they were actually showing the Champions League final in the cinema, one of the big recliner seats, big screen, and, you know, Dolby surround sound, all the rest of it. And I thought to myself, I've never watched a football match at a cinema before, so I'm going to do that. And in terms of how I think it's going to go, if Liverpool play somewhere close to their best, I think they've certainly got the edge. But they've had an easier route through to the final. That's not to say they've not been tested this season. They've had some testing matches in the Champions League, and of course they ran Manchester City ever so close in the Premier League all the way up to last Sunday, and of course won 2 domestic trophies. So they haven't had it easy. They've played 60-odd games this season, but Real Madrid this is the third English team they're playing. They've knocked out Chelsea, having been behind. They've also knocked out Manchester City, having been behind, and Paris Saint-Germain. They've done it the hard way, and they seem to be able to extract victory from the jaws of defeat. So whatever advantage Liverpool gain tonight, they will not be taking it for granted, but they also don't relinquish those leads easily either.
Is there worry about pitch invasions? I mean, we've seen this quite recently, this phenomenon which is quite unsafe.
Yes, it is. I mean, I've said several times on GB News in the last week or so, I don't think it's endemic of a wider problem.
Right.
We're seeing a natural break now after tonight. There's no serious football being played now until, August. There's no national tournament. We're seeing the World Cup later in the year. It was just bloodletting, Darren, if I'm honest with you. That's what I feel. And I know about football violence. I grew up in an era when it was trendy for guys in the sixth form at school to get involved in it, even if they're from quite safe middle-class backgrounds. And for years, the police couldn't get to grips with who the real perpetrators were, because they listened to left-wing media academics tell them it was just oiks from the local estate. It wasn't. It was actually people holding down really good jobs in the city, did a 9-to-5 job, Ford Sierra as it was there, maybe a Cosworth if you got a really good job, working in the city. That was a different thing. That was organised crime. That was groups called firms, and they even had calling cards to reflect their commercial backgrounds, tagging themselves onto club, causing organised mayhem, and outfoxing the police with the use of technology and the use of transport systems. This is different. Most people you saw at Everton, at Nottingham Forest, for example, Manchester City last Sunday, that was a joyous occasion. Manchester City managed it quite well. They put a ring of steel around the players. Yes, the goalkeeper, Robin Olsen, got a minor attack, but that's just one person. That's why fans still need to be kept behind the perimeter, because there's a danger that one person will misbehave.
Well, of course.
I don't think we will see that tonight, although it's funny, I said this last week, but just before the last day of the Premier League, you won't see any problems this weekend, but we did see a problem at Man City, so don't say anything I take with any seriousness, don't give me any credence, but no, I don't think there'll be any problems tonight. Stade de France was built it broke ground in 1997, opened in 1998 for the 98 World Cup. There's a little bit more space around the perimeter of the pitch. It's more like an Olympic stadium. In fact, if Paris had won the Olympic bid in 2012 when London had it, that would have been the Olympic Stadium.
Right.
So there is a little bit it's not quite a moat because there's no water, but there is a gap there, and it would be more difficult for fans to encroach. There are only actually 20,000 fans each from Real Madrid and Liverpool, so it's not even going to be filled with normal fans. There's going to be a lot of corporates in there, different environments to what we saw maybe at Manchester City, which was a more rarefied group of supporters, more of the hardcore fans.
But what a shame, though. It's a few bad apples ruining it for everyone,
It was ever thus. It was ever thus, Darren. I remember, that's what caused fences to go up. It was always a minority. Even in the 70s, even in organised days, in the 80s, it was only a minority. It was, a big firm, as we call it, if it was attached to a football club, if you were a big firm travelling away, then you had a number of about 100, right?
Yes.
Well, the actual attendance of the game could be up to 30,000.
Well, of course,
It's still a minority. So, look, I don't expect any problems tonight. Champions League tends to be quite a corporate event as well. UEFA would always deny that. Also, we've had the problem with the pitch this week as well. It's been gathered into place. It was only actually finished laying on Thursday at 1 o'clock in the morning. But that was because, to be fair to UEFA, as you mentioned in your link, they did have to move this match at late notice from Russia to Paris for political reasons. So they are a bit behind times in terms of scheduling. They've had to shoehorn or crowbar a Champions League final in, and they just have to get on with it. Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool coach, has been moaning about, what about the joins and all the rest of it? But it's a Desso pitch, it's part plastic. I'm not anticipating any problems.
Tell us about Chelsea. Do you reckon they're going to have a cracking summer transfer window thanks to all this new cash sloshing about?
I think it's possible, Darren, but I think there's going to be a bit of commercial reality hitting home at Stamford Bridge. Roman Abramovich ran the club since June 2003 and absorbed losses on average of £900,000 a week. Now, I'm not convinced that a hedge fund or a capital investment, as we're seeing with Todd Boehly, are going to stomach that. They'll want to return on investment within 5 years. They're not going to do that by sacking managers every 5 minutes. Antonio Conte is now at Tottenham.
Yeah.
It was revealed in Chelsea's financial accounts a couple of years ago that it actually cost them 26 million pounds to sack him, to get rid of him, and he was only there for two years, and he did a good job. He won the Premier League title and the FA Cup in 2017 and 2018. So they've got to move away from that. Their wage bill every month, Darren, £28 million. That's not as much as me and you.
Extraordinary numbers, I know. They are incredible figures. But honestly, this debate about foreign influence and foreign actors in the Premier League, I think it's one that's going to rattle on and on. But thank you very much, Aidan, for your time the day. Now, folks, well, you can catch Aidan later on Mark Dolan's brilliant show, as ever. But now we're going to talk about Ricky Gervais, right? This new Netflix special, Supernatural. It's gone viral. In it, he's joking, novel idea for a comedian, I know, about trans activism. And predictably, it's caused quite a stir. But how many of the angry Twitterati types who've criticised him have watched the entire show? Not many, I'm going to suspect. He later explains how his intention was to expose the double standards of the anger by trans activists. With me now to discuss this is the stand-up comedian, Patrick Monaghan. Patrick, cheers for your company. Are LGBT groups, whatever the LGBT, I'm not sure what it is, the alphabet soup, are they right to actually label his show as quote-unquote dangerous?
Well, look, I think the main thing here is that, as you mentioned there in the intro, I think people have forgot, not just from the group, but everyone has forgot that Ricky Gervais is a comedian and a very good established comedian. He's not a politician. He's not some sort of, running some sort of political group. All he's doing, if anything, is he's helping all of these groups. He's talking about every taboo in his comedy, and all that has done has opened up debate, and it's got more people talking about these issues. Hence, look, we're talking about it today, and this is from a special that he recorded, whatever it was, months ago or whatever, and it's people are talking about it who've not even watched it. They probably watched 30 seconds of it. So it's like, they're only watching something that's been edited and not realising that, Gervais is attacking everything. He's talking about these topics, and he's attacking people's prejudice or people's assumptions on how we look at things. He's not actually, he's not actually coming to attack people. He's attacking minority groups. He's attacking how people think about these things. Right. And I think the dangerous... Sorry, Darren. Yeah.
Patrick, we've got just coming to the end of the show, but I'm just wondering, as a comedian, do you actually worry about what this actually does to the whole comedy as a whole, with actually new comedians on the scene being really reluctant and quite scared of saying something that's going to have someone on Twitter reach for the cancellation button? Just in a sentence, if you would.
Yeah, it's going to get to a stage of where you're going to have warnings up saying, when you come to a show, it's going to say, warning, this show will contain comedy.
Well, exactly.
I mean,
it's really depressing, but Patrick, cheers very much for your time. Folks, we're out of time, unfortunately, but you've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your company. This show is on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 o'clock, but for now, I'm going to leave yous with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry with sunny spells for most, though there'll be a cool breeze. Let's look at those details. The sunshine will continue this evening in the southwest, where it's been dry and bright today. Though out of the sun, it will start to feel a bit fresher this evening. In the southeast of England, skies will be a little cloudier, and there is a risk of a light shower for a few of us here. And in South Wales, a dry and largely clear evening with some late sunshine is on the cards, feeling cool out of the sun. It's looking a little cloudier in the Midlands than it has been this afternoon, with a risk of the odd shower. These are most likely close to the Peak District.